salutations, and welcome to the youth political podcast that is PolitiBabble, where this week it is all about the education system.
I'm Oliver, and as usual, I'm joined by my sterling co-host Archibald, as well as today's guest panelist, Eleanor.
Hello.
Yes, so we're back for another week where we're all talking about the education system, and it's maybe, is it failing, is it working, and around that. So, yeah, what have you guys been all up to this week?
Well, myself and Archie, we've both just launched a sort of new campaign / organisation group called Youth Vote IM. Just give us a little plug there. Our main aim of Youth Vote IM is to increase the voter turnout on the Isle of Man, and it's interesting and exciting. But yourself, Eleanor, have you been up to much during the week?
I've just been reading, to be honest. There's nothing else much to do at the moment.
Well, I suppose you've both now left compulsory education, the joys of GCSEs.
I suppose everyone here has been through compulsory education, so I suppose that is why. I suppose for many people in their life, it's probably one of the things politically that we can all have views on, because we've most of the people in the world have been educated, and I suppose it's one of the things in life that we should be most fortunate for, because, you know...
Well, educated or not, you still have to answer, I think, the most important question on the whole podcast, as we say every week. Eleanor, if you were a cake, what cake would you be?
I would be a cheesecake, because is it technically a cake? And it shows how, I'm quite a person to push the boundaries. So, a cheesecake, is it a cake? It can be whatever.
I suppose that is definitely a discussion. Is a Jaffa cake a cake, or is it a biscuit? I'd say cheesecake is a sort of cake, sort of tart. It kind of falls that mix between the two, depending on what the base is, if it's baked or not.
I wouldn't particularly call it a tart. I think a tart, I wouldn't call it a tart particularly.
What would you class a tart as then, Oliver?
Something that consists of pastry.
Could you argue that as a base? You could have a
yes.
What's it? Oh.
Usually it's a biscuit base though. So
banoffee pie is technically a biscuit base.
Yes, but it's a pie. It's not a tart.
Yes, but pie you could argue has pastry, and so it does get into a whole level of debate, which I suppose we're not. We're not a pastry show. If you do want a PolitiBabble baking show, I'm sure we did have one suggestion at some point for a bake-off. Whether that will happen, who knows? Who knows? So.
On my point before about, we've all been through the education system, so it's something that we can relate on. So I suppose it comes to this question, which is the education system working? And the current style of education in the United Kingdom at the moment and the Isle of Man is that some may choose to go to a nursery or a playgroup before the age of 4, and then at that age when they reach 4 in September, they will go to a primary school. Until they reach the age of 11, and then they will go to a secondary school. It's changed. I know in Scotland and in Ireland you go at different times and other things, but usually there's 2 steps, and if you opt to then from the age of 16 to do a sixth form or go to a college,
that's all not compulsory.
Yeah, it's not compulsory, but it's going on for the further and then potentially university.
So we addressed kind of the question of the week: is the education system working? I suppose we'll give our views on that at the end, and we've seen quite a lot of, obviously COVID hit us quite greatly. So I think COVID had more of an impact slightly on you, because you had to then learn after COVID and still sit mini assessments on. So what was kind of your experience?
I think that at my school we didn't have Zoom lessons over lockdown. We didn't have any support face to face over even if it was through a laptop screen, and it took teachers quite a while to reply to emails. So I think because of that, our year suffered quite a bit with how we learnt, because we weren't getting taught the way we should have been. And then due to the exams being cancelled, I ended up sitting, I think I counted it around 75 mini assessments.
Quite a lot.
Yeah,
yes.
For the 11 subjects I sit. So it's a bit is it fair on our students' mental health to be put through that as well?
I completely agree with you there. Considering I've gone through we've gone through the same year. We've different schools have done things differently, and this is the annoying thing that I find with the Isle of Man's education system, and it probably happens in the UK as well, because they have different exam boards, different schools, different types of schools, but they're all under one, if they're a public school, is that they're all under one government, but yet other schools do things completely differently. You had 75 mini assessments. I think I counted about 16 or 17 that I had, and that's where it ranges. So I suppose and like you say, it's not fair. You'll have done more than the average person would do, or the amount of exams that the above average person would sit. You've probably done more than that. It doesn't make sense. You've been in school for less time, and the support as well from having the teacher strikes as well has not been the same. So,
but I think that then proposes the question. There's many of the view that maybe exams are more outdated methods of assessment. There's others who prefer kind of the traditional standpoint. It has been said that our education system still derives from very Victorian methods of you learn X, Y, Z facts, you then put X, Y, Z facts in an essay, and you answer an exam paper on X, Y, Z questions. And some have said, yes, it's got easier now, there's more applied stuff. So it kind of does pose the important question: do you think exams are still mainly the best mode of assessing students' capabilities and kind of giving them a qualification?
I think they're getting a bit outdated. I think if we look at the US's education system, that even though they have like a lot of weaknesses in places, their like point of views in homework, quizzes, tests, like how you participate in class to get your final grade is a much better, like less stressful alternative that we could look at.
I sorry to interject there, Archie, but I feel on a similar way, is that there's this idea that you have to perform. There's this idea that, okay, you fail, okay, you go on to do something else, you go to a college. The support, the middle ground, it's hard for some people, and like you say, I know of one particular primary school, I was set homework quite a lot. The other primary school, their rule was, apart from like creative projects that they might have done as a sort of homework, they didn't have any. And I know people of the similar level, the same level to me, and there is no difference, that's
primary school. Should there necessarily be poet in primary school? But going back, I think, to your point about America's system, it is quite interesting because they do take literally everything, and that for some people, yes, that's less stressful because you don't have to worry about a single exam point at the end. But it would pose the interesting question: does it actually make it more stressful? Because every single piece of your work, every single assignment, every bit of homework, you can't really afford to mess it up if you do want to get that top grade at the end. So it doesn't maybe pose... It's obviously, you need a mix, I suppose, between two systems.
Yeah, I like how in America they can make up work. So if they've missed stuff, they can go and they can redo some like assessments and stuff, which I think would be a good idea over here. Especially because like in I sat some actual GCSEs back in November, and someone in my class actually fainted in the actual GCSE.
Oh, crikey.
And they basically put her in for special measures, but it's still unfair that if you're not feeling well that day or if you're not at your best, it's going to affect your grade that could last for years.
So maybe it could be... I think there was one suggestion I know from my maths. There's definitely a suggestion to maybe they used to have modular exams. So they used to have modular exams for maths A level where they'd do one like every term, and you'd have to do the first section was all non-calculated, taught it in different modules. So maybe modular exams, you think, maybe work slightly better as a working in the system.
Yes, in some ways, I feel like they sometimes help. I mean, that's a lot of what the things are in vocational studies, is that you do a little bit, you sit as some sort of assessment, and then you carry on, and you get to that end goal, and it's less stressful, and you feel as though sort of more accomplished because I don't know, there's not as much stress. You're doing a little bit at a time. I think that's something that could be looked into, because it's seen as such a big thing, exams, and sort of so much pressure on them. But sometimes the support leading up to them is not always the best way. And I forget sometimes that there's a sort of a curriculum kind of thing You know that there is what are they called, syllabuses? You know.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And sometimes the way in which that they are covered, there's a lot to do, and I think it's sometimes content as well. For some exams, some subjects are easier and harder than others. That's going to be for some ways anyway. For some people, for how they find them. But for some, if you measured them to how much work and hours you've got to put in compared to others, some GCSEs, if they were measured properly, would be worth more than others.
Well, I would pose an interesting point, because I know in A levels they say, oh, that's an easy A level, X, Y, Z. But I would say it actually depends on the person. Some person might find maths really, really easy, be rubbish at English. Other people might find English they don't do any work for. They can just go and write, but they have to work really hard for maths. So I wouldn't necessarily say it's a dependent work. It's like you could have business as usually taken as a easy so-called option, but for some people, writing essays might be a particular weakness. It's actually harder.
But
so it does, I'd say, depend on the person.
But let's say for something like science, you won't know much of that content before you learn it, unless you have pre-knowledge or have taken an interest in it. You won't. Everyone's in the same sort of boat.
Yeah, it's fair.
So there's a lot of content to learn, whereas for something, such as, I don't know, I can't think of anything off the top of my head, art, for example, it's your ideas. There's not a lot to learn.
Going into art, I did two
Yes.
art GCSEs. I did art and graphics.
Let's get on the correction there.
And 25% of your art grade was depending on writing and annotation. And I think that drags people down, because I had a friend who was dyslexic and couldn't write properly and really struggled, yet that brought her overall grade down because she wasn't getting the support for the writing, even though she's a brilliant artist.
But it comes down to these exams at the end. You make a fair point there, but at the end of the day, it's for art, there's not a lot of remembering you've got to do, whereas for science, if you've got to know the equations, you've got to, and this is where it comes down to. I believe that it's not always, these exams are not intelligence in some ways. It's remembering. I don't know what your thought is on that, Archie.
You seem to be mentioning kind of the different skill sets people have. Some people are better at writing, some people are not good at remembering, others are really good at it. So I wouldn't say there is a model that there's a kind of one-fits-all model, it's like one size fits all. So we see maybe with exams, some people perform much better at those remembering exams. I know I perform really well at remembering exams, I do very well in them. But maybe the other moderate exams I dislike, because it means I can't really afford to take any time off because I need to hit X, Y, Z, X, Y, Z, X, Y, Z. So I think there's a need to maybe remove the stigma behind, like vocational qualifications or different, like BTEC, for example. So you suit the different personalities and different learning capabilities with different things. That's why I would say the education system isn't working to maybe help certain students in certain places. But I wouldn't support kind of the total degradation of our current system, because there's people who flourish under every system. So there needs to be a variety of systems in place.
But the problem is that the remembering system, the writing out of things, you get given questions, you have to write a response, and or naming, describing, all these other things is seen as the way forward, as the the best way to measure someone's intelligence, whatever. The other ones are not seen in that way. They're not seen as, oh wow, that they can really prove something here because they've got this and they've got that grade.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. But it's all about kind of removing the stigma behind it. It's not. It shouldn't be. Oh, you can't perform well at writing a 2-hour-and-a-half history paper. Oh, well, you must not be intelligent then. It's taking more of the attitude that.
No, I agree with that.
It's finding people's different working abilities. It's like in the UK currently, they have a shortage of people working in kind of vocational roles within labour. And it's actually saying, these are key components of our society. We need that, and we need that expertise in that area.
You've only got to look at the lockdowns. The key workers, and unfortunately, the key workers that helped society stay together to keep moving are some of the lowest paid people in society, and they don't often require too many qualifications.
Well, I think there's. We're not getting into pay. We're not here to talk about.
No, but I'm just saying that I just thought I'd raise that point.
I think looking at teachers as well is that are they realistically paid enough to be under the stress like that they are, and like looking at how some teachers can make the difference between a kid failing or passing a class, whereas some teachers just don't care and will leave you to like work it out yourself. And I think looking at there's some teachers, like especially the young ones, who are just awfully stressed to the point like they've got the schools are still having to pay all this money to the exam boards, but the teachers have to mark everything at the moment. And I think is it fair that they're maybe so stressed that their level of teaching is degrading, especially because like in the UK they have Ofsted, which is like monitoring how the teachers teach, but over here there is nothing. So I think especially if you get a teacher who maybe should be like teaching to a higher standard isn't, it can actually affect that kid's life because there's nothing to catch them teachers out.
So maybe we're better to have kind of like an oversight body here.
Yeah.
I suppose it's all about making accountable education, making transparent education. I think there was originally a campaign over here to kind of look at maybe putting league tables in. I think it does, yes, put stress, maybe could confer stress on students from teachers trying to get the Ofsted XYZ rating, but it does kind of make that motivation in order to drive that better, I think. But we do, I suppose we've talked a lot about kind of the secondary compulsory education, but we do face another side of education system, which is kind of within university. And obviously over here we get there's government funding for university, and there's also government grants, and I suppose more generous than other UK neighbours, etc. So should we let's say if we take UK for example, is the government not funding university like free university, does that affect the system?
I think it does, especially because there'll be kids who are extremely bright and could be the first ones to go to uni in their family, but just can't afford it because their family hasn't saved up anything and there's like nothing to support them. Whereas the people who may be a bit more wealthy can afford to send their kids there, and that's sort of creating that even further pay gap that we currently see. Which
I think what we've got to acknowledge is that different paths and different routes and different types of exams and education suit different people differently, and that with the university sort of side is that it's not for everyone, and that I think if you can pay, you should pay, and if you can't pay, then you should get the assistance that's there. But then the people that do want to pay should argue that everyone must then pay, and that's where you've got to cut the line. But I suppose if you can't pay, then I think that there should definitely be government support. But if you can, then you should.
But if you look at kind of university education, it is an investment. A graduate will earn roughly between £100,000 and £130,000 more, £1,000 more than their equivalent who didn't go to university, and the top end will earn $500,000 plus more. So is it really kind of fair to say that we should make kind of the average taxpayer, Joe Bloggs, who works, didn't go to university, dropped out of school, and kind of made his life doing something, should he then have to pay for another person to go to university when he doesn't feel it's necessarily needed? And then maybe does it actually increase government control on education? Maybe downsides to that?
I think it probably does in a way, but looking as well at the fact that over here I think there's a grant, there was definitely a few years ago, where if you agree to come back and teach over here, if you go get your degree, you don't actually ever have to pay back your student loan that you take out, which I think that could be a possibility, like looking at the careers that are heavily needing people and maybe suggesting like if you go to uni and study this, you'd never have to pay back your student loan because you're providing to the country rather than go into something that's already heavily oversubscribed.
Obviously, so long as you go into that sector, because I can say, oh yes, I go to uni to get the education, I get to become a teacher, and then afterwards go into something totally different. But it does, talking about university and even our education system over here, there is a kind of almost left-wing bias in many sorts of things. So does that affect our education and what we're putting into the minds of our children? Not that we have children, but just as in children in general. Because I definitely think it is important part to know, especially within kind of UK universities. There's a giant culture of removing kind of the debate in education. Even though like in schools, there's not that necessarily non-partisan view. I think it might have been Balakameen. A week or few ago had an assembly endorsing Joe Biden, which doesn't necessarily present an equal side of the view. So do you think that it's affecting us?
I suppose, schools now look at being a lot more inclusive and look at a lot more range of views, which I think's a good idea. And you're seeing a lot more places for students' views to be expressed, which I think's good, and student bodies and student debate panels. But then again, I think that there should be a chance for students to put some input, as they leave the Isle education system, to put forward their ideas and what they thought well and what they thought didn't well. And it's coming back to that sort of the regulator, the Ofsted, and did you at all feel let down? Were there what problems were there? I mean, nothing's ever going to be perfect, but there's always going to be ways to improve it. But Eleanor, your thoughts?
I think there should be like people taking into account of how they feel and everything, and I feel that people don't often listen to the children as students, so it's just what teachers think, whereas teachers don't always have an understanding, especially senior leadership don't have the understanding of what it's like for some kids, especially because going into primary school, I volunteer within Girl Guiding, and my group that I volunteer with are quite high class and aren't, under the poverty line. Whereas I also volunteer in a certain primary school, which I think has 36% on free school meals. And looking at the difference at the same age in speech and development in general, there is a shocking difference. And I think it's looking about how that difference is going to be taken up further on, how we support them kids especially.
Definitely. No, I feel as though, and this is the great thing, that school is for everyone, and the best thing about school is learning about ourselves and learning about others, and it's not all school, in my opinion, isn't all about exams, and I think exams are a good way of measuring, but I think there should be more taken into account, and I think there should be I think we do need to invest a lot more into schooling, and like you say, with the people leaving the island and coming back and not having, if you're going into training, working up at Nobles Hospital or coming back as a teacher, but we've got to not look into just those areas. We've got to look into a lot more different areas, so that we can draw attraction back to the
But
island.
aren't we even teaching about the right things? We see a kind of a lack of awareness, especially within youth. We're putting out a survey at the moment. So if you do see that, do fill it in. We're not actually being taught about maybe the important things like how to fill in a tax return, how to go out and vote, how maybe to engage in politics, or even about climate change.
Yeah, I think definitely within especially voting. Just finished year 11, and only one teacher on the top of my head has told us about voting. I think his exact words were a bit of history and then get registered or I will haunt you. I'm nearly old enough to do that. And that is the only teacher who's ever spoken to us about voting. So I think there's quite a few of my friends who didn't even know we were old enough to register to vote, which I think is like really bad, and just in general is a lack of publicisation by the school.
Yeah, I suppose there's a lot of things that that you could say, okay, you learnt this, and someone was saying to me as well, you work all the way through to these exams, so why aren't you, for example, from the youngest age, say for example, let's take English, why aren't you working on your coursework from the day you start? Because that's all you need, and you can learn the different aspects, but there's a lot of skills and other things. I'm just taking this subject for example because it's quite an easy one and lots of people do it, is that there's a lot of skills where you can learn the skills, all the different types and all this, but then you can work on that because that is seen as 50% of your grade, so work on that a lot earlier. That's just that's one of my thoughts on things that we can.
I definitely question that English is an easy subject.
I didn't say that.
You said it's a never mind. You said it's an easy subject, so
I did not say that. I said everyone does that subject.
My opinion, English is one of the hardest subjects.
Yes, indeed.
I definitely think that.
It's time to hear from our listeners.
That's my mute button.
There we are. There's your buzz button, Oliver. So we did hear from quite a variety of people today. I had a poll out as well. So we saw about 80% of people thought the education system is failing, which is interesting considering most of those are actually in education currently. So I think there's definitely been exposures from our COVID pandemic and kind of exams. Are they made for the best system? So we heard from the likes of kind of Elizabeth saying, I feel like, yes, the education system could be better. So it's maybe building on that. There's still far to go. And Josh has said not enough support for those middle people. I know Oliver and I do talk about in the car on the way here, always. We do mention about kind of the middle people in education, kind of the laps there. They focus on different ends of the spectrum.
And I feel, and they are the people that tend to often not get as much support or left to drop, that can do, or get off the radar. They'll be fine, and this is where, things can go wrong. But Ailish, not Ailish, you'll come to her in a moment, but Era has said, yes, I think so, because it only fits for the average student. It doesn't help if you're above or below average. The work would either be too easy or too difficult. It doesn't take into account different learning styles that suit different students. So I think it is, and that touches on my point entirely, which I think we've all come to the idea, the consensus that...
Have we? Well, we'll see in a minute.
That we agree on. We agree on that. Would you agree that we think that there's different styles for everyone?
Oh yeah, there's obviously different styles.
Well,
yes.
So I was just. Yeah.
But I think there's also we've had quite a lot of comments about, are we teaching the right things? So Henry says it's too woke, almost teaching about kids the wrong things about life and doesn't prepare them to work. We've continued that theme with kind of Adam saying, yes, it's too outdated for the needs of our modern society. We should be taught more to be innovative. I can't pronounce that word. And then Catherine said, I believe that we should be taught about taxes, real life problems, actual important things. I suppose lots of education, I'm not sure how you feel, Eleanor, but lots of our education does teach us, like in my maths, let's work out this angle in a triangle. Yeah. Will I use that in my day job? Most likely not.
I think the most that we've ever been taught about is through the likes of Junior Achievement, which is an incredible charity which provides all this information. But I don't think schools should have to rely on outside organisations and charities to come in and teach the kids. I think it should just be included in like the maths GCSE syllabus, for example, to like get them a GCSE, but also provide them with life skills.
Definitely.
Yeah,
I feel like most subjects could offer that, and I think life skills, if they're going to use them, it's often seen as a bit of a
don't do drugs, kids. That's basically the essence of life skills. But we've heard again, I think there's quite a lot of about kind of overlooking kind of students and like focusing on percentage of jobs. Fitch has said secondary education focuses on things that were only a percentage of jobs will require, or overlooking the mental health of students studying materials they won't necessarily need, and standardised testing is a flaw for many students. So that theme, it's interesting, the themes have continued. It's not just kind of one person saying one thing. Themes continue here, and Lucy has said, I knew the workload would be a step up, but the amount we expected to manage, especially when all our teachers say take a break and time for yourself, as well as being expected to maintain our mental health and other commitments, is insane. So I think there's this very key view that our education system does kind of expect too much from us as students and doesn't actually teach us about the things we need later in life.
Yeah, I think like looking at CAMS, for example, I think CAMS currently has an 18-month waiting list, which is mental and just is showing how education in a way is affecting the young people of today.
There's got to be something that's causing it.
Yeah.
So what do we think? Do we think education is a broken system? Do we think it's still working? Is it working? Is it failing?
I think there needs to be quite drastic changes to it. I don't think it's failing. No, I'm not going to say that. But I think there needs to be changes.
Is it working?
Not entirely.
Not
no.
very well. Okay.
No, I don't think it works for everyone. I think needs to be changing to make sure everybody's on an even playing field, and that yes, it works for some people at the moment, but I think it needs to be changed so that kids aren't as stressed and that we're all equal and we all have the same chances in life, no matter the background.
Definitely, yeah. That everyone can go into something different and do what they want and have that level playing field.
I would say that has kind of, at least in my experience, has been emphasised kind of with the introduction of more like BTEC science, etc., kind of with maths as well, and then looking at saying to people, we've had that in our sixth form. Let's think, what do you want to do after sixth form? There's plenty of other opportunities, like vocational, like doing apprenticeship, like going away to university. Presenting all the options, I think it is definitely working a lot better than maybe it was a while ago, because there is that more holistic approach to education. There is those vocational activities. So I would say it is currently working. There's improvements that can be made, like making sure there's more partisan education, there's more education about voting, like taxes, all of that, the important life stuff could definitely be incorporated more. I do think it does work to a degree.
Yes, definitely. I agree on that as well. I feel as though that should be implemented a lot more. I think things could be changed, and things that are quite a lot of content should be taken. Things that, do we really need to know about that? Look at its purpose. Definitely.
Well, we did forget to find a political historical figure for this week, so please do excuse our lapse of judgment there. But guess what we do have?
We have the Isle of Man's news, the latest headlines and coverage of the whole week. So the Isle of Man borders have completely opened for the double vaccinated. There's been, currently is, 11 active cases. There's public outrage on the elm trees in St Mark's. Today was the final sitting of the House of Keys, and a youth group organisation has been launched. Youth Vote I Am. That's it for this week.
Why they don't broadcast it on the news, I really don't know. That is something I think, we should hijack someday. Not that we plan on hijacking. If you are from Max Radio and listening, no, we're definitely not doing that. So it has been an interesting week, I suppose. The main story in the headlines was obviously, I think, the elm trees in St Mark's gathered about
the elm trees and COVID.
25,000. Was it like 30,000? 31,000 signatures. There we go.
I think people. I was listening to the House of Keys sitting earlier today, and there was lots of discussion on what was going on.
There's a hot potato in the Keys passing around.
Yeah.
Yes.
But I think they should be kept. I think everyone thinks that the whole tunnel's going, when it was said that there's only 25 trees.
I think they're planting like 250 or something in replace.
Yeah, I think that there is, I suppose, some misconception. The thing is, I can see both sides of it. I'm both an environmental, but also looking at maybe the speed limits, and that maybe was another option for change. But obviously, if you're coming from the planning point of view, I'm a private citizen landowner. I can't change the speed limit on my stretch of road. It's hard to get that change. But look, I think either way, I think we'll get some sort of resolve now, I think.
I think it's especially bad that there have been people harassing the people who own the land and they have young children, which I think is especially wrong in a way. So.
I would have had more problem if they'd said we're cutting down the whole thing and we're not planting anything trees to replace. But look, I think they do try to be responsible. They are adding more trees.
Yeah. But they may, although the Minister Boot was saying today that basically unless there's some sort of you have to do a petition appeal thing now. I'm not petition of grievance or what it's called.
Basically, they left it too late in the process.
Malou commissioners just ignored it, and it went through planning all like jolly and well, and then after like appeals closed, that's when everybody.
But it does show the sign blind. We know our first time I was in Manx Radio, for example. There is actually a sign on the door saying you will be recorded on video. I didn't notice that. It's sign blind. The planning went up, but if people don't choose to look, they don't necessarily realise. And that's quite a point.
I suppose there's discussion on it. We've just got to wait and see what happens further. But the Isle of Man borders have completely opened for the double vaccinated.
Not us. We can't.
No, unfortunately.
Just a test and release for anyone that's not been double vaccinated, but you can still come to the Isle of Man whether you're a resident or not.
Yes. My grandparents can come over, and it's easier for them to come back to the island, come to the island, visit, than it is for me to come back.
Yeah,
it's very funny.
But sadly, from this over the past few weeks, the Isle of Man borders have gradually opened more and more. We now have 11 active cases.
But I find it really interesting pointing out the vaccinated. I'm all for opening back up our economy, opening back up after COVID, but it has been shown that the vaccinated, I think it was in the one of the BBC News kind of top correspondents, he got COVID after being double vaccinated.
I think 7% in hospital are double vaccinated as well.
And it's quite interesting how, well, I would be fine with it if I was vaccinated, but I'm not vaccinated. The government won't vaccinate me. And yet there's still a risk now I could catch it quite easily.
Yeah, so we now...
I don't go to one of the schools which has it, so I'm...
Yeah. So we now touch on to our Youth Vote IM, which I explained a little about earlier, but I suppose it's just... if you want to sort of find out a bit more, unless Archie has anything else to add, you could follow us on any of our social media platforms, which at the moment are Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
At Youth Vote IM, or emails at youthvoteim@gmail.com. But have you seen our campaign, Eleanor?
Yeah, I have. Our head of sixth form put it on our Google Classroom.
Oh, you put it on?
Yeah, to fill in the form.
Oh, to fill in the form. Oh, of course. Oh, yes, I know you heard of sixth form. Yes, that'll be right. Yes.
Yeah, well,
very helpful.
Yeah,
yes.
very, very thankful.
Well, we hope you
filled
in the form. That's very good.
Yeah, we've had quite a few responses.
We've had some. I can give some interim figures if you want. I think we've had like 120 responses in a day or something, which is very, very good. But it does look like an overwhelming majority of like 70% so far have said they don't feel well informed enough to vote. I think that's a very interesting issue, and we've seen that obviously in our education. We've looked at maybe we're not educating maybe the right things. They don't necessarily know. Yeah. Am I registered to vote? How do I go and vote? What do I need to look at? What issues matter to me? That's kind of very, very key there.
Yeah. So I think now, Archie, is the perfect time to go over to our UK and international news correspondent yourself.
But before that, I do want to mention it's very interesting with knowing MHKs. Only 42% couldn't name a single one of their constituents MHKs.
I think I'm lucky because I live in Middle, so I obviously have Howard Quayle as one of my MHKs, which I think...
Can you name the other one, though?
Bill Shimon.
Ah, very good, very good. Well researched before coming on, I must say. Oh, yes, indeed. So I think it's fascinating, the name recognition. And obviously, I think Boris Johnson actually has more name recognition than Howard Quayle so far. So we'll see that competition ramp up in a few weeks. I'm sure we'll release our results somehow, and you'll all hear about it. So yes, we do come into our joyful international news, where we have obviously the joyful Matt Hancock affair. I have a brilliant meme to try and describe. Zuma, previous South African president, was sentenced into jail. The British Navy had a skirmish near Crimea with some Russian warships, and some Ministry of Defence documents were found at a bus stop, which... so that's was quite shocking then. Obviously, the big thing in the week which is kicked off is the Matt Hancock affair. I must say my favourite one of him. I can't actually read out what the tweet was, but the picture was Matt Hancock. It was doing his press ups, but it was superimposed, so it looked like he had lots of legs. It looked like a spider. So it's like the pitter patter of the Matt Hancock spider coming towards you.
Wow.
Yes.
No. I'm not impressed.
No, nor am I. Is anyone?
I was expecting something bad to sort of come out of him soon, and for him to go. People have been waiting on it for weeks and months, I
think the video's quite graphic in a way.
Yeah.
It's just as an image in your head.
I do wonder how they got the camera there.
It does pose a question: should the Secretary of State actually have a camera in his office? Because there's private, confidential meetings going on there. He should be able to know he's conducting things securely.
He didn't know, I don't think.
But obviously, this, kind of.
I can understand CCTV for safety purposes, but someone being able to access it and put it out there to the media, is that the right thing, realistically?
Yes, I agree. So it is fascinating. So I'm sure we actually all agreed that he was in the wrong.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Definitely,
yeah.
Interesting. We've agreed on something, which I suppose PolitiBabble is sometimes is a nice welcome relief usually. So another one, I think it does pose a really interesting question: is our country actually securing its secrets well? Because 60 MOD briefing papers were found in a pile at a bus stop. And then they're acquired by a local person who then handed them into the BBC saying, "Oh, I found these." And then the BBC chose to then run a story with it, which I think they surely should have just given them back to the Ministry of Defence.
But we've seen this we've seen this before throughout the past few months, the past year or so of leakages and sort of Home Affairs not having a great control on.
I think there's a difference between leakages from Home Affairs and leakages from the military.
Yeah.
There's one marked official and for UK eyes only, that's secret. But,
yes, but it's an inconsistency throughout the government. So,
well, I think it does pose really interesting questions on, like, are we actually secure? Do we have a national security? Because obviously Russia seems to infiltrate everywhere now. If you're Russian and listening, we don't. Yeah, we have no problem with you. But yeah, it does seem like Russia does have influence everywhere. It could be. Yeah, I'm not sure what do you think anything particular?
The only thing that springs to mind is a few years ago that Russian submarine that was found in Irish waters.
Oh, yes.
Which I think just shows how our world's a bit not exactly sharing stuff that they should be, but other stuff sort of sleeping through that shouldn't be.
Well, we don't know what goes on the water. We see out there beautiful blue sky, beautiful blue ocean, and we can see the ships on the surface. Anything underneath, there could be a giant squid under there, or sea monster, who for all we know. But it's so unknown. It shows kind of the world still does have very unknown pockets. Like no one in the public would know anything about the military plans. So it does show kind of how we entrust our representatives in governments, and then that kind of comes to us. So we do come to, I think, one of my favourite parts of the week, which is our guest takeover, where we head to the land of BookTok. So, Eleanor, you have a minute to speak without hesitation, deviation, or repetition. That's from the BBC Radio 4, just a minute, about BookTok.
Well, BookTok is a section of TikTok which suggests with people suggesting books that they want to read, and I think it's extremely interesting because it is inspiring a new generation of readers who probably would have never picked up a book before. For example, me, who I read a lot, picked up a book called They Both Die at the End, which isn't my sort of book, yet is now one of my favourite books of all time, and I think it's extremely enjoyable to see all these new books and authors that would never have had their books discovered now blowing up. And especially it's developing me to read classics and making worthless books, but then again on the other hand, worthless books which are a bit awful and promoting the wrong things are also getting hype. So I think it's sort of inspiring new readers, which I think is really interesting, and showing how a social media can be used for a good thing to get teenagers into reading. And yeah,
very good. So on that sort of note, as well as we fall into our recommendations, obviously this is a great thing about
social media.
It's about social media. So we can exchange our views, and people go, well, if you're of similar opinions and views, and you share, you enjoy similar things, is that you can recommend things to each other.
It does kind of open the world up to more. I know. I suppose I have too many books to read, so I don't look for more recommendations. But it does show the connectivity of the world now. We've talked about kind of PolitiTok before, with the politics side of it, and now got the book side, which is fascinating. I must say, it does. Yeah, it's definitely interesting what people can do now with social media.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, I think it. I do love reading a book. It is a joyful thing to do. So we come where the aircraft carrier takes off, and we head to our recommendations.
So, Eleanor, do you have... Well, I'm sure you're going to have lots of reading recommendations for us, but what recommendations do you have for us this week?
Well, I have two for listening, actually. I have one, I think you mentioned, Archie, a few weeks ago, You're Dead to Me, which is obviously a history podcast that our history teachers recommended us to watch.
It's excellent.
Yeah, and then I also have a podcast called The Wooden Spoon, which is run by a few study tubers over in England, and it's just talking about positive mental health and how to improve your look and life and stuff. Then for reading, I have The Song of Achilles, which is another BookTok book, but I feel like I'm not going to describe what it is, because I feel like the enjoyment of it is reading it, not knowing what's going to happen, and not only knowing it's about Greek mythology.
Fascinating.
Yeah. And then And then for watching, I'll always recommend Grey's Anatomy and NCIS, which I feel like everybody knows, but you can't go wrong.
Yes,
I've never watched any of the.
I've not watched
Grey's
them. I've heard of
Anatomy,
them. I've
actually.
heard of them. They have
Yeah.
good name recognition.
Yeah.
Recognition, I must say.
But Archie, what are your recommendations?
Well, I
for
was
this
going
week?
to come to you, but I think Oliver's skimped on his recommendations to us this week.
Maybe next week, guys.
yes,
That's why you should stay tuned for next week.
Yes,
I
to
might
find
have
out if
some-
Oliver ever gets recommendations again. Well, this week, reading-wise, I would kind of recommend. There was a brilliant book I've read. I might have mentioned it before. Dictatorland is one of them, but also Africa by Richard Dowden is fascinating book there. Get my words out. Watching-wise, I must say, the performance of Sajid Javid towards one of the Labour MPs questioning him over a second job and say, you've been taking XYZ money over COVID, making this much. Yes, but it's not actually from the government. But he just said, I think the honourable gentleman has to try a lot harder than that, and just sat down. So I think looking at Sajid Javid and kind of his statements are fascinating. I do recommend all his YouTube political videos, but they are really quite interesting to watch to get insight on the world of politics. And I've been listening to an absolutely excellent podcast by BBC World Service called The Lazarus Heist, all about kind of North Korea and their hackers and computer experts kind of using their skills for criminality and the whole is around a story produced, and they were trying to take £1 billion from the Bangladesh Federal Reserve Fund. So I think that's fascinating. I do recommend watching. I won't spoil any more of it, but it is not watching. I do recommend give it a listen. It's very easy to listen, and I'd say very, very good.
So before we wrap up this week's episode of PolitiBabble, what three things do you think that education organisations / governments around the world could do to improve things for students?
I think for definite, they can look at how they do their exams, maybe reduce the number of exams needed and increase the length they do them over, so doing modular exams, for example. I think they also need to look at how that people's wealth can affect their education, maybe look at supporting the middle people and just making sure everybody starts on an even playing field. And I think also looking at textbooks, the price of textbooks, and just looking at whether some schools providing them and others shouldn't. They should maybe be an equal number of textbooks for students to be able to give them all, even whatever the exam board, an equal start.
I think a level playing field is certainly something that needs to be taken on board. But thank you very much for coming on today. And again, if you'd like to be a guest on PolitiBabble, we'd very much like to hear from you, and we do enjoy having our guests on, as it does have a increased range of views amongst the panel,
and we're not so one-sided.
Yeah.
Yes, so that concludes our brilliant episode of PolitiBabble. For this week, join us next time for a discussion about something related to colonialism. I know this week we're supposed to do cancel culture, but that got cancelled. So leave
We
a
may be
like,
back with that.
subscribe, and stay tuned for more. As usual, you can find all the podcast versions on your favourite podcast providers. Get in touch at PolitiBabble on all forms of social media, and let us know your views.
You've been PolitiBabbled.